all to come and fill up the seats in the front, if you don't mind. If everyone can just move forward. Thank you so much. Welcome to our panel discussion titled Patronage, Politics and Place. This is part of a series of public programming around our current exhibition, When We See Us, a Century of Black Figuration in Painting, which runs through until the 3rd of September 2023. Our wonderful panelists for today include collectors who have lent work towards the When We See Us exhibition, Atose Aguele and Pule Taukobong, and the discussion will be moderated by our Executive Director and Chief Curator, Koyo Kuouh. Before we begin, I would like to read their brief biographies. Atose Aguele is the Managing Director of Aguele Energy and has more than 20 years of experience in the oil and gas industry, stretching across the United States of America to Nigeria and the wider African region. The company currently has established presence in South Africa at Saldanha Bay on the West Coast and at Airport Industria in Cape Town, as well as Walvis Bay, Namibia. After completing his studies in the United States in 1988, he started his career as a sales manager with the Bridgestone Firestone Limited tire manufacturers in New Jersey, where he remained until 1991. He then moved to Nigeria to join the established family-run Granny Gas Limited, the first indigenous LPG bottling company in Nigeria since 1967, as a commercial manager in charge of the group's marketing department. He was appointed as the commercial director of Granny Gas Limited in 1993. In 1995, Aguele set up Union Petroleum Services Nigeria Limited with the aim to explore and manage a broader scope of the oil and gas industry across the wider sub-Saharan African region. Union Petroleum Services is still a significant trader of LPG, with exports of LPG from the Bonny River Terminal, operated by ExxonMobil. Aguele holds a graduate degree in economics and a BSc in animal science from the University of Delaware in the United States. In addition, his position as managing director his position as Managing Director of Aguele Energy, he also holds directorships at Union Petroleum Services Limited, Aguele Foods Limited, and Industrial Air Products. Pule Taukobong is a founding partner at CRE Venture Capital, a leading venture capital firm that invests in and partners with visionary entrepreneurs, building category-defining companies in Africa. He previously founded the Africa Angels Network, the first technology-focused angel investment group to focus on sub-Saharan Africa. Prior to that, he held several investment roles at Investec in Johannesburg and Cape Town, South Africa, and New York, United States. Pule has been named one of the 100 most influential Africans, and has been a guest speaker at prominent conferences hosted by the likes of Milken Institute, South by Southwest, Harvard University, Duke University, University of California, Los Angeles, and New York University, where he has spoken on the topic of investing in technology in Africa. He is furthermore a Kaufman Fellow and a graduate of the Durban University of Technology. Koyo Kuouh, who will be moderating this discussion, is the Executive Director and Chief Curator of Zeitz MOCAA and has been since May 2019. Prior to this appointment, she was the founding artistic director of Raw Material Company, a center for art, knowledge, and society in Dakar, Senegal. She has organized meaningful and timely exhibitions such as Body Talk, Feminism, Sexuality, and the Body of works of 6 African women artists, first shown at Wiels in Brussels, Belgium, 2015. She curated Still the Barbarians, the 37th EVA International, the Island Biennial in Limerick in 2016, and participated in the 57th Carnegie International in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, United States, with a deeply researched exhibition, Dig Where You Stand, in 2018, a show within a show drawn from the collections of the Carnegie Museums of Art and Natural History. She was the initiator of the research project, Saving Bruce Lee, African and Arab Cinema in the Era of Soviet Cultural Diplomacy, co-curated with Russia Salty at Garage Museum of Contemporary Art in Moscow, Russia, and Haus der Kulturen der Welt in Berlin, Germany. Active in the critical field of the arts community in a pan-African and international scope, Kouoh has a remarkable list of publications under her name, including When We See Us, a Century of Black Figuration in Painting, which accompanied the exhibition, Shooting Down Babylon, the first monograph of the work of South African artist Tracy Rose, Breathing Out of School, Raw Academy, Condition Report on Art History in Africa, Word, Issa Samb and the Undecipherable Form, Condition Report on Building Art Institutions in Africa, to name a few. She has served as curator of the educational and artistic program of the 154 Contemporary African Art Fair in London, United Kingdom, and New York, United States from 2013 to 2017, as well as the curatorial teams of Documenta 12 and Documenta 13. Kouoh is the recipient of the Grand Prix Mireille Oppenheim 2020, the Swiss Grand Award for Art that honors achievements in the fields of art, architecture, critique, and exhibitions. Before I hand over to our wonderful panelists, we would like to screen a little bit of our When We See Us video. Thank you very much. Sorry, Koyo's just reminding me that I didn't introduce myself. I'm Thandozani Dlakama, and I'm curator here at Zeitz MOCAA. Thank you.
Whew. It's kind of goosebump moments because it really sits well with many of the reasons of why we collect as a family. I mean, for us, we collect a lot of art to inspire. And so a large amount of our collection sits in entrepreneurs' offices across the continent. So you'll find our art in Yoko's offices here in Cape Town. You'll find them in Flutterwave's offices in Nigeria. And these are tech entrepreneurs building the next category-defining businesses for this continent, who then have this art around them on their walls, inspiring them daily. It inspires us as a family. I also think, as collectors, or more importantly custodians, it's also up to us to share the work. So to be able to share it on a platform like Zeitz has been a great honor. So it really gives me goosebumps. It really aligns well with our mission as a family. So yeah, very, very great honor.
First of all, the collection and what the curators have done is really epic for contemporary African art. I'm not sure, and I maybe stand to be corrected, but I don't think any exhibition of this scale has ever been attempted or even carried out before. So, and the importance really is about the conversation of contemporary art on the continent, and not just on the continent, in the diaspora.
We're happy we've had the opportunity to participate in this type of in this exhibition. We participated in exhibitions before, but I think this one is definitely special. Again, I just think it's going to give so many people opportunity to see such great works on a grand scale, and just really happy to just play a small role and share this experience, and hopefully everyone, share this experience with people around the world.
The conversation that was going on at the time, where we also had liberation movements, we had anti-colonial movements, we had human rights issues in America. And all of this was happening at the time a lot of these contemporary works were being created.
Artists are historians in many ways and amongst many things, but I think it is important to have these moments captured by us at this time. And I think what Zeitz has done has been incredible, because as you look at all the wonderful creations that have been done here, they've been done by Black artists. They're giving Black people a voice in a moment that's been captured, for hundreds and hundreds of years going forward. So very important conversation to have, very important to highlight globally what is happening and being created by Black artists. And it's, again, an honor to be part of it in a very small way.
One thing that's been important is and one of the reasons that we took our collection to so many other museums to share it, was to show people who were not familiar with the work of Black artists that Black people do the same things as everyone else. Not everything that a Black artist produces can be considered protest art. We're not showing people in chains and being whipped in bondage. These are people who are sitting at home reading a letter, or dancing, or sitting in a bar, or enjoying the outdoors. These are everyday things that Black people do, just like anyone else who is living and enjoying their life. There's a vibrancy and a love of life that comes through all of the work that I've seen.
Gentlemen, please join us. Thank you so much, Tandanzani, for the lovely introduction. Thank you, Pule and Atose, for accepting our invitation to have a chat tonight. Basically, we are just having our conversation, and you are allowed to listen in. Right? And I think that you said already a lot of things in the short clip that we saw. It's a great pleasure for me to have both of you here today. I mean, the exhibition has how many lenders? I don't remember. 74 lenders from across the globe. So you are two very important one, particularly because both of you are part of the lenders who have the biggest contingent of works in the show. But maybe we just start from the beginning. What is the first work you bought?
Yeah. So I think it's slightly convoluted long story. So I went to a school called University of Delaware. Delaware is a small state in the US. Most people sort of miss it on their way to DC. But Delaware is an old state, so quite a significant state. In fact, it's the first state. And what that does and did for Delaware was provide Delaware with very old American furniture. And when you say old American furniture, you're talking about copies, basically Queen Anne furniture from basically the UK. But it was significant enough to have a real, market and, quite a bit of furniture, mostly furniture. And I had a roommate, Brian, who was an amateur expert of early American furniture. And he would go out and buy chairs, and when we say old in America, we mean 200 years, 300 years old. And it was quite interesting to watch him buy and sell some of this furniture. And so I asked to accompany him to one of these bazaars. So he would simply go to what we call rummage sales in America. I don't know if they call it the same name, rummage sales. And garage sales. And typically people die off and sell their furniture and art. And he would pick the furniture, but he had no interest in the art. I had some interest in art, but mostly just from an aesthetic, like most people just like paintings. And so the first piece I bought was a piece by Henry McCord. He painted in the late 1800s. It was a piece, and I remember it was 1879. It was of a landscape in upper state New York. And I bought that piece for $90. And I remember and so there was an auction a couple of weeks later, which Brian was going to put his furniture in, and I put this painting in. And I got...
Early flip.
Yes. And I got $1,600 for it.
You see?
And so not only did it pique my interest, and so I realized, well, it's not only beautiful, but it's a significant store of value. And so that was the first piece. Obviously, it's not, I sold it. And so I started looking out for more. I did a couple of more, not any with that sort of significant markup, but, and so that's really how I got into art personally. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Atose, for this account. Pule, what's about you on the same question?
I wish it was as exciting, but it wasn't. So I was an accidental first collector. It was in 2007. I had been living in Cape Town for about 2 years then, working down the road at Investec. I was a stockbroker there. And we used to do crazy things with our bonuses. A lot of them were spent at our soccer up the road on Kloof Street. And this one year, one of my mentors said, Pule, stop wasting your bonuses, buy art. And the first piece I bought was a Kentridge, which I was convinced was fake because it was done with a Koki pen. And he doesn't usually paint with Koki. Mm-hmm. But that was the first piece I bought in 2007. And then I never bought again until 2010. Wow. And 2010, which I'm happy to talk about, became a very conscious art collecting journey, which aligned as I traveled the continent.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm happy to go into that whenever you'd like me to.
Well, I mean, it's quite telling. I asked this question on purpose because I think that the art ecology is a space of so many important protagonists. Certain people say players. I don't like that word, players. I think there are roles within an ecology, and these protagonists occupy those different roles. And the collector is at the center, is more and more at the center of that role. Because if you look at it from the different perspective, we're looking at it from the perspective of the artist themselves, where everything begins, basically, looking at it from the perspective of, you know, the market, looking at it from the perspective of institution, non-profit, art centers, and what have you. At the end of the day, at least now, the collector is very important. And I think that it has always been like that, you know. From the moment where, how can I put it in correct English? What I want to say is that maybe it has transformed to become the individual collectors that like we have you today. But before that, we had, you know, commanditors. The church was a collector. Public institutions was a collector. The cities, the government, and so on. So I am saying this because when we were putting this show together, we were confronted, of course, with the necessity of thinking about, first of all, what we want to put together and how we want to assemble it, from which sources, and the individual collector, of course, has been at the center of that. So when you say, Atose, that your first experience where you were still a graduate student, which is quite early for any future collector actually to begin, and that you were inspired actually, or how do you say it? You were animated by the capacity of art to gain value. Can you talk? How did your interest grow later after that experience with Brian?
Yeah, so this was 1985, so that's a long time ago. And I bought a few pieces, but after that, buying and selling, just with Brian. My first real piece I bought to keep was a piece actually in this exhibition. So it's a piece by Mukasa, I think. It's probably on here. It's a large painting, and that was 1992. I just got married. We didn't have furniture in our house, but I bought the piece, and I nearly had an early divorce. But my interest had already been piqued before that, and so not only was I was primarily driven by the beauty of art, but I also recognized its significance. But not just the significance in terms of its the store value, but also historical context. I could see how art had pulled together many cultures, European culture, for example, in America, and how that was still not quite clear on the continent. And so for me, it was important that once I started, and the word collecting is a little bit tricky for me. I like to prefer to use the word custodian. But once we started buying, it was important that the works we bought reflected the history I was familiar with, which was pretty much African history. I was quite agnostic as to what part of Africa. What I did find in my early connection, it didn't matter whether it was a Ugandan artist or a Nigerian artist. There was a thread running through, or a Ghanaian artist. There was a thread running through all of these works we bought, and you can see it with this collection.
That's very interesting. I mean, you said something that I would like to dig a little bit more. You said something that when you were saying that the ways in which you were seeing art being traded and mediated, shown, displayed in Euro-America at the time was not what you were seeing on the continent. And this is, I mean, I'm a generation of curators and art professionals who really work very, very hard to sort of correct the misstanding, so to speak. But I have come to believe that, particularly in my new role here in making this museum, that we definitely have to, reclaim ways and the space of doing and handling art that doesn't necessarily has to follow the commodification method or the separation method. I mean, separation from life, basically, right? So and maybe this is for another conversation, but it just came to my mind. Can you speak a little bit, both of you actually, of your relationship, particularly to the works that we selected from your collection towards the show?
Yeah, I mean, so the works that you selected for our collection towards the show, for me, a lot of them resonate both on a spiritual level and on an everyday level. So if I look at the piece of Zandile Shabalala, which will hopefully kind of call the conversation, where it's Zandile herself sitting in a garden, and it's very hard to see, but in silhouette, there's an image of her as well, cross-chaired next to herself. And I find myself to be very much an introvert, and I like to think and reflect in spaces alone. I like a piece of nature around me when I do it. And when we acquired that piece, so I acquired with my siblings, and we had a conversation around it, which meant a lot, but I was like, look, knowing a lot of us and how we think about us and how we reflect on the decisions we ponder on about life every day, this piece represents a lot of what we are, and was very honored to really speak to Zandile and say, look, all my siblings and I resonate deeply with this work. Could we add it to our collection? Similarly with the Katlego piece called The Upper East Side, there was a Kerry James Marshall piece which ended up selling at Sotheby's for the most expensive art piece by a living artist at the time. This was 2019, 2020. And I was very fortunate to see that piece in New York. And to see how KJM has really inspired. I mean, I really want him to do a show on the continent at some point. Hint, 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 hint. But, you know, when he has had so much influence on artists who bring in his work, it was the most physical piece I'd seen brought into an artist's work. And it resonated with how I felt when I saw that work. And to then see Katlego bring that into his work really resonated well. But I'll let you talk about some and I'll come back and talk about others as well.
So I can't say there was, certainly in our collection, there hasn't been a central theme. It's
This is the Zandile work.
yeah. This is
So that's the image and silhouette that really attracted me to that piece as well, where you can see the eyes, but it's herself. And it's literally a conversation that she's having with herself as well, but also reflecting on the moment.
Yeah. So I think history has been a big part of.
And that's the Katlego piece.
Sorry.
with the Kerry James Marshall on the within. It's a work within a work, basically.
Which Puff Daddy ended up buying.
Yeah.
It's the craziest story.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. So, as I said, there hasn't been one central theme. It's clearly several, typically captured almost in a silo. So it's really, a lot of the works we've bought a lot of it has been historically driven. A lot of the works we see, the portraits, for example, are of, so and one was, for example, of Nigerian women. That always resonated with me. It reminded me a lot of my female relatives, my mother, my aunties. The portrait of a lady, for example, always reminds me of that, and that was quite. But then there's a piece that we bought more than 10 years ago now, which is Girls in Waiting, which is and so Nigeria became independent in 1960. That piece was done in 1959, so just on the cusp of independence. And Nigeria, of course, being a very patriarchal society, women's voices were still quite, just like the rest of the continent, really not really heard. And for an artist that long ago to have done that painting, basically, and you see the painting, I don't know if it comes up, and you see it's a painting of young women and very young girls, and the lead woman is almost opening a curtain to say, we're here too, and we've got something to say in this new Nigeria. And so the piece, and that really was.
Can we get the piece?
Yeah. So, and that was by a male artist, and one was a male artist who recognized clearly with that piece the role women had played in not just in the anti-colonial movement, but post that women were going to play post the independence of Nigeria. So that's the piece, and you can see she's almost opening a stage curtain to say we're here too. And this 1959 is more than 60 years ago. Today's world, it doesn't seem as revealing, but this was fairly risque art in 1959. And so this certainly is one of our more significant paintings, and I'll go into the others later.
Yeah. I mean, you both pointed to a specific artist. Pule, you mentioned Zandile as like a driving kind of initial kind of love, so to speak. Atose, you immediately mentioned Ben and Wonwoo, and thank you. Actually, I can never thank you and Monica enough, because thanks to you, because of your quite solid and Wonwoo collection, we could have that many Ben and Wonwoos in the show. So I really want to understand. I mean, I understand from you, Atose, that you have this love for modern art, really, and you, Pule, you have this love for very contemporary, young, fresh, recent kind of generation that paint. Can you speak a little bit to that? Why that for you, this very, very contemporary, very young, and you that desire, I know that love for, you know, more established, elderly artists?
Sure. I think it draws parallel from kind of what I used to do from my 9 to 5 when it comes to my venture capital firm was out to prove that young Africans can create the most epic technology companies as well. It doesn't just happen in Silicon Valley, it doesn't just happen in the West, it happens here, and it's done by young entrepreneurs across the continent. And I've been doing that now for about 12 years. And these are entrepreneurs that you may interact with on a daily basis. Like if you come across businesses like Yoko, that was a company I've been very involved with from the early stage. A company like Flutterwave in Nigeria, Andela is another one. And in doing so, what I realize is that the young generation is inspired by people like them. They want to know that a person like me can do something epic. And similarly, in those spaces, often the entrepreneurs weren't in the, call it sexy hot spaces in the cities. They're often in the up and coming areas, in your Woodstocks, in your outside of town. Same thing in Nigeria, it'd be areas like Yaba where you'd find people building these category defining tech businesses. And the artists would be there as well, saying, you know what, we are doing creative. We're not necessarily in the heart of the city where all the banks are, but we're building what we think is really creative art. So as a result, I was really drawn to young artists that are kind of challenging the norm rather than doing something that has been done for legacy. Secondly, what was also happening is that I felt, maybe particularly more in South Africa, a lot of the arts that I'd historically seen was of Black people suffering in like challenging environments. It wasn't us thriving and doing epic, if I could say it, but like really doing epic great things. And so I found a very strong bias to younger artists who are really showing us shine, showing us like reach for the moon, doing things that you'd never typically see in art spaces of Black people doing. Now you're seeing this younger generation saying, you know what, I'm free diving and I'm a Black person, I'm gonna paint it. I am skydiving, and I really like that. I like, it's like us doing lavish, luxury, challenging, exciting things now. And as a result, that seems to be more created by younger artists. Hope that answers your question.
It does give perspective. Atose, what is your
So
take?
it's showing my age, this question, because what you've now termed
You're really not that
all
old.
contemporary. So
You're not even 60 yet,
yes,
so
but when
take it easy.
So when I bought the Mukasa, which was painted in 1991, I was buying a very contemporary piece, right? So it's just perspective. So I would have been like Pule, you know, buying the Mukasa, buying the Cotiers. All of those artists were painting at the time I bought, and they were showing who we were at that time. So that was quite contemporary. Of course, we do have a large collection of older pieces, but even then, I remember 30 years ago, and then one was only 30 years old, and then one painting was only 30 years old. Today it's 60 plus years. And so I think time sometimes sort of redefines who we are. In saying that, I'm quite excited about the new artist. And I was just speaking to him about one of the works in this Zandele, right?
Yes.
And how excited I am about her work. And so I certainly am not prescriptive about how I collect or what I collect. I think the works being done today are just as important as the works that have been done in the past, and they will take their rightful place in this history. And so, yeah, for me, it's really about beautiful art. It doesn't really matter whether it's painted 100 years ago or today.
That's very interesting, and that leads me to ask you actually, because when people imagine collectors, first of all, they imagine a lot of wealth, which is not always the case. That's why I'm saying that. And second, they imagine someone who spent their whole time looking at art, scouting, talking, visiting. How is your process?
Go ahead.
So process
And
is...
actually, how is your process, and how much time do you spend effectively, like every month, into that passion?
So there's a couple of ways to answer your question. Why do we collect? And I think one of the reasons, I think, I mentioned that earlier, it's important to be a custodian of what's being captured right now. What we spend a lot of time doing, and again, this comes from backing entrepreneurs, is helping artists understand the entrepreneurship in their practice. So the idea of, I'm an artist, therefore I should be broke, does not sit well with me at all. And that fallacy should be thrown completely out the window. Artists can be millionaires while they're alive. And so we end up spending a lot of time with artists, helping them understand, what does entrepreneurship look like? How do you scale your practice? How do you market yourself? What does VAT mean? How do you create an invoice? So there's a combination of, call it post-purchase of a work, that takes up exponentially a lot more time than collecting the work. And so as a result, when it comes to collecting the work, the process is more ad hoc. It's more like, okay, this is what interests us. There's very much a black portraiture narrative. But in that it is, and not all artists want to understand the entrepreneurship side, but I would say definitely the majority of the artists in our collection love that we do that we focus a lot on entrepreneurship. And that's the part that excites us, to say, here's an artist that has now managed to buy their mother 2 houses, has managed to do A, B, C, D, and is really flourishing and thriving. It then inspires other artists to say, I can make a living from this, but I can also thrive. So the process is kind of intertwined between pre-selection, black portraiture, okay, really focused on that. It ties back to why do we collect? We really want to get more black faces in institutions like this. We want to get more black faces of art out there as well. So one of the key things we also focus on our family is that art should be where people are as well. It shouldn't just, these are great institutions and establishments to come and experience art, but where are people like us spending time where they can experience art? They're experiencing it in their offices. That's where we spend a lot of our time. Okay, let's get art in offices. And we'll spend a lot of time in that, which is why the collection sits in the entrepreneurs' offices. Schools is something we want to do next, is that a lot of young people spend time at school. So how do we get art in those schools? The first Kerry James Marshall I had seen was at a university in Boston. I was like, what? How's the KJ? That's what things we need to do. Where are the youth? They're spending time in colleges, spending time at high school. How do we get art in there in a way that's safe for everybody? So it's a lot, and it takes up a lot of my time and my sister's time, but it's something we're extremely passionate about, and hopefully we can also figure out how we scale.
I might come back to the coaching later because
Okay.
that's quite interesting.
Okay.
How you combine the coaching of artists to develop as entrepreneurs and the collecting. But I would like to hear your take, in terms of your process, your research, scouting, and how much time you spend into building your collection on a, let's say, monthly basis, or how does, I know it's quite organically, but I would like you to tell us about it.
So I think we're always thinking about art because we're surrounded by it in our home. It's a big part of our lives. I don't think history has always been an important part of my life in terms of how I view the world and how I view my presence. And so certainly in works we buy, I always try and see if I can find some sort of historical context, even if it's done today. How is this going to look if I can project in, say, 50 or 100 years? So history has been an important part. Certainly the African narrative, and as I said, I've been quite agnostic about, doesn't matter what part of the continent or in fact the diaspora. That has always been quite an important central point in how we've collected. I haven't been purposefully avoided art of struggle or strife. I just haven't gravitated towards it. And I'm not saying there's no role for that. There is. I mean, this exhibition is obviously showing a different face. And I suspect it's doing so because there's been an absence of that. It doesn't mean that the paintings that depict struggle is less important. It's not. And I think it's important we make that clear. It's an important part of our history. But I haven't particularly gravitated towards that. I think there are a lot of institutions and a lot of collectors that have done that. And I'm sure there are opportunities for people to see that. It's mostly, and I suspect that's why we've got a number of works here, it's mostly been about African figuratives and how we see us, basically, how I can relate to the art that we see. I mean, growing up as a child, my sisters would have their hair plaited, for example, right? That's how we grew up. I mean, that's part of, I think, most Africans. And so that's what resonates with us, our everyday life, and how beautifully it's depicted by these artists.
You're actually preempting my question, but it's a good segue to that question. Maybe we can dig into it a little bit more. I think some of the themes that are covered in the show include the everyday, like the quotidian, the idleness, the joy and revelry, the indulgence and opulence, the triumph, the repose, the sensuality and spirituality. Those also kind of themes that are prevalent in your collections. And I mean, Atose, you have actually answered the question actually without getting in. But Pule, maybe can you speak to that in regards to your collection?
Yeah, I mean, it's so strange of what you call the title of the show, When We See Us, because that is important for when we collect. We want to see ourselves in the art. We want to see it in moments that we see ourselves on a daily basis, that we believe isn't highlighted enough about Black people today. So when we out there looking for pieces, I mean, to go to this piece from Sungi.
Stop. Yes. Pause.
Is coming back to recentering the Black woman in this pose of confidence, yet also just in a moment of really accepting this is where I am today and I'm cool with it. You know, and it's something I could see in my sister. It's something I could see in some of the pictures my mother actually used to pose with her friends back in the day. And it's important to resonate with stuff that again, when we see ourselves in it. So it holds a strong center of how we collect and why we collect, is that we have to be able to resonate it on a very personal capacity.
I like that, personal capacity. Maybe you want to say a little bit more. I mean, Atose, you have loaned work to other exhibitions. Pule, no, you have loaned work to exhibitions. How was your process, your experience towards for the conversation that we had with you towards this exhibition, from the moment we started approaching you about the project and to the opening, basically? What can you tell us that journey?
Yeah. So it was interesting when I got that. I'm not sure if I had a conversation with you first or I got an email from Tanzania.
I asked Tanzania to write to
To
you.
write to me. Yeah. And of course, I called you quite excited. And so one of the strange, not strange, but one of the phenomena that really happened even in pre-independence, was the conversation around the conversation with artists. So, and one, for example, knew Sekoto, and they wrote to each other. I believe Tana did an exhibition with, I think it was Enwonwu in 1981 in then Salisbury, which was Harare, which is now Harare. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that they had even joint exhibitions, and this long time ago. And so when I got that email, I had always imagined a world where you would have an exhibition with Enwonwus and Sekotos, for example, and that conversation, but not to have artists from, I don't know how many artists, and to look at a period of 100 years. I thought that would be fairly ambitious to do. And so when you said you would say, well, Madame Koyo, she's an ambitious lady, so I'm sure she can pull it together. So once that conversation started, first thing was, what works would the museum be interested in? And how will the works we select or we loan, how would it fit into the larger collection? Which, of course, I hadn't seen a lot of that collection. And so that's how we started. And that journey has been quite interesting, working with your team, incredible team, and coming, I think, once or twice, just to talk and to be inspired. And then finally seeing it put together, and seeing a Bearden who, as a student in the States, we grew up looking, going to Bearden exhibitions, Jacob Lawrence, and then seeing that in the same exhibition with an Enwonwu or a Tana or a Sekoto was just surreal. I think these men, and if you believe in life after death, these men, these ancestors would probably look and won't believe what you've done here. These artists who knew Jacob Lawrence, for example, was in Nigeria in the 50s, and would have known Enwonwu, certainly. He probably would have known Kotier and some other artists. He would have known some of the musicians like Fela. So, but they couldn't imagine this sort of exhibition. So it's been quite an interesting journey.
Thank you. And your account?
I mean, the process has been enlightening and educational for me. I think so I've loaned works individually before, rather than like part of a larger exhibition. And for me, it was truly enlightening to be part of that, to see how a show of this size is put together and how our works are selected to be part of it. From the what was most exciting about the process was we have the blessed advantage where a lot of our artists are live and seeing their reaction. It was tremendous, you know, to hear an artist say, I would have never thought I'd see my work in the same room as a Barclay Hendricks, and to see that reaction and how much drive that has created in the artists in our collection. That is probably the most priceless part of the process that truly, truly left us excited.
You pointed at something that is at the heart of the exhibition. There are many things kind of at the ground, but something that is at the heart of the exhibition is exactly, first of all, bringing a temporality that is longer than the last 10 years or the last 5 years, so to speak. And secondly, is also really bringing artists together that actually were working parallel and juxtaposed, so to speak, and simultaneously in the same exhibition, and bringing that in conversation. I mean, you mentioned George Pemba. I mean, the opening of the exhibition with George Pemba and Romeo Bearden. A lot of people who know Bearden don't recognize Bearden because they only know his later works and don't know the early figurative works. Another instance is of course, my favorite is Barclay Hendricks and Sherry Samba, which for me are two black men in the world, more or less of the same generation, exuding really the same kind of vibe and swag and, you know, outlook into the black experience, but never really brought together. I mean, it goes on and on. I mean, I also love very much, you know, the transgenerational kind of transmission. If you look at the Buford Delaunay and the Lynette Yadiamboakie, which you see very clearly how it is connected. So that brings me to one of my last questions to you. Why is it important for you? I mean, as a collector, you're a lover of art, but you're focusing your collection very consciously. You pull a lot in figuration, kind of black figuration. You Atose and Monica also in a different way. Why is it important for you to collect black artists?
So it's important in the sense that we want to see more black art, not only in institutional spaces, but in public spaces. And for us to have that in our collection enables us to do that. So to further explain, you know, it's been an interesting journey loaning works to institutions that some of them have never had black artists' work in their collection before, and having a conversation as to why it used to have to come from us. Now you've got institutions globally saying we recognize that we have a vacuum in terms of how do we represent black artists, please help us. So it's great that we can enable that tool. I still think the most exciting part about it, you know, I'll use an example. We have some of Nelson Makamo's work at Yoko's offices. And when his work was featured on Time magazine, the amount of celebration that happened in that office and excitement to say, you know what, this art exists here, yet it's on Time magazine. We are with this, we are with him, we've all succeeded. And that's where I just saw a clear example currently of how art can inspire the next generation. We are big believers of that. Creativity is the source of many great things. Creativity is the source of knowledge. It helps us, you know, further advance ourselves. And we've seen that happen. So the more we can have art that's like us, that's inspiring people like us, and can put it in spaces like this, it's very, very important.
And you?
Yeah, so I think for me it's so again, when I started, I wasn't deliberately looking to collect African artists. It was what resonated with me. As we developed the collection, it was clear to me that there'd been a huge vacuum, and obviously visiting museums and galleries around the world, there was a huge gap, and I certainly didn't see contemporary African works exhibited anywhere. The continent at that time had a huge deficit in terms of museums, and so 30, 40 years ago, there was probably very few museums on the continent you could go to find contemporary African works. Certainly none in Europe that I knew of, or in the States. So if you wanted to see beautiful black works, you typically needed to go to so-called collector's home. And that was my experience. So it was important that, in raising a family, that if my kids weren't able to see these works in museums, they could see them at home. And certainly that has been a big part of what has inspired us.
That's so beautifully said. I started speaking about the ecology of art and talking about the different protagonists and emphasizing on the importance of the collector as a protagonist, and particularly the individual collector, which is our conversation today. And then you told us this beautiful story with Brian and your first flip. I am very interested in if you could share with us the circuit of acquisitions that you employ to acquire art, because there are multiple ways. There are, of course, the commercial gallery system. A lot on the continent, we know you can still buy directly from the artist, because most of the time the environment doesn't necessarily have that commercial market, so to speak. Apart from South Africa, there are not many places where the gallery system is established. There are auction houses. There are multiple ways. I just would like to know, you have a coaching entrepreneurial activity related to your collection practice. What are your routes that you use to acquire art?
So it's definitely several. And we're a bit of a strange and crazy group where I'd say we've comfortably bought probably more than 35% of our art sight unseen. So we've been comfortable if it's something we've gotten just images of and haven't seen in person, we are more than comfortable to buy it. And that's just like a philosophy that we've instilled, and if we like it and we like what the artist is about. So, and often we find out what the artist is about either through stories we've read, social media, interviews that they've done, that this is someone who can see the practice not only about themselves, but how they stand in the industry, by art sight unseen. Because for us, that's only part of the process. Acquiring art, to Atose's point, like collecting is, I don't think it does justice, it's the part that you start with. Okay, we have a piece of art. For us, it's like, now what? Now how do we make or be an enabler to ensuring that this artist flourishes? That's the part that really, really excites us. So the art is beautiful, it resonates with us, it stands with us, but how we acquire it, whether it's through an auction, whether it's through galleries, whether it's through other artists connecting us directly with the artists, whether it's Instagram is another tool we use a lot. It's just a tool to get to where we're trying to go to. What our end goal is to show that artists can be up there with the bankers.
So,
very nice.
Look, so there's a lot being said about collectors today, right? So if you look at art historically, collectors don't exist in the discussions around art, European art or American art. So we're going to disappear as a conversation piece as to our collection, because so the artist remains, the works remain, collectors. But to answer your question, so as I said earlier, there was an absence of galleries, or a lot of galleries. We had 1 or 2 galleries in Lagos. I think there was one gallery in Abidjan. There were very few galleries scattered around the continent. There was no auction house when we started collecting, none, selling contemporary African art. And so if you look at some of now let's make a distinction. Strauss is always, obviously, Strauss and some of the auction houses in South Africa existed. They've existed, I believe, for a long time. But I certainly wasn't going to come to South Africa in the 80s to buy art. So, we were essentially not participating in that. So for us, our early collection was buying directly from other collectors, people who were reselling or disposing of art. To some extent, we knew some of the artists directly, and we would approach them and buy from them. Auction houses for us started to, so the first auction house, or the first auction I know of that sold contemporary African art was, I believe, in 1999 or 2000 by Chike Nwagbogu, so the brother of Azu. So he had the first, at least as far as Nigeria is concerned, the first auction in 1999. And it was it was like a very historical moment, and some of the Awanwus, I think 1 or 2 of these Awanwus we bought at that auction. And so that's really 23 years ago, was the first time auctions sort of started. And then there was a large absence, and then of course Bonhams and more recently Sotheby's started about 10 years ago. So we're not prescriptive about how. If we know the artists, we'll certainly engage them. If it's through a gallery system, we're also keen on doing that, or an auction house.
That's very interesting. Before I open to the floor, I realized that I've been sitting just looking at my panelists and not looking at the audience. Excuse me. How do you feel? I mean, I have to ask the question differently. How many times have you come to see the show?
4 times so far.
So far. Atose?
I think about 4 times.
Okay. And the show is still on until September for those of you who haven't seen it, so you can still come, and I think that you'll come. Both of you will certainly come more. And how do you feel about the show and your works in it?
It's exciting, it's humbling, but I think, again, going back to what it's done for the artists that are alive today, that for me is kind of the most fulfilling part about it, where there's an artist people had never heard of or seen in KZN that has now just instantly been globally visible. Yeah, there's no words for that. That part is just, I think that's what it's about.
So it started, so the first time we came, it was quite surreal to see the collection. And then I think it was the second time I came, there was a couple from Holland who, during my during my tour, asked me a question and says, "Do you know anything about this collection?" And I sort of gave them a tour of the collection.
They took you for
a
museum guide.
Yes, they did. And the comment the couple made was, I have never seen African artists like this anywhere in the world. And they were so shocked, almost to say, we didn't even know Africans painted like this. I mean, that's how, and it wasn't, it was really a genuine shock at what they saw. And I think that's when I started realizing the significance of what's been done here. The fact that we open it's a completely new world for a lot of people to see works like this that they never imagined happen. Of course, at the end of the tour, they asked, so how do you know so much about some of these works? And of course, I couldn't help but say, yes, some of our collection is here. And, so that's, I think, been quite interesting to see how people, and just people who have visited without me here, what they've said. I remember we were at the gift shop and there was a lady buying something, and I think she spoke to my wife and said, have you seen the collection? I mean, it brought tears to my eyes. And she was quite emotional about what she had seen. And I think the impact, would be felt, and especially if this work, if this collection is able to travel, I think its impact is still, I think it's really going to be phenomenal, what people are going to say and how it's going to impact people.
Thank you so much. And I mean, if you ask about travel, and I think today we can very proudly say that the show is traveling, and it's traveling really to very good, top-notch institution. The first stop will be Kunstmuseum Basel next year, at a prime kind of time in May. We are very close to to finalize with the De Jong Museum in San Francisco. And there are more conversations going. So the show is really slated to be around until about 2026 or 27 across different institutions around the world. So that is very pleasing. That is very good to know. Yeah. And I also say, because you are lenders, we would want you to extend your loan forms, right? So thank you so much for this. And I would like to open to the audience. There will be a mic going around, either with Tandanzani or our research assistant, Rory. If you have any questions, comments, whatever, don't be shy. Yes, we have someone here. Claire.
Thanks, Rory. Thank you so much for this. This was really informative. Coming from overseas and kind of moving back to Cape Town and trying to understand the landscape has been one that has been really, I think, quite tough. I work with a lot of people who are in the art field from around the world, and they always ask me when I come here, how do I buy? How do I start? And I'd love to just kind of hear some insight from you. If somebody is from overseas wanting to come and kind of invest in this space, how would you advise them to go about it?
So I have a bias. I'm an investor in a business called Latitudes Online. Definitely check it out. And the reason I back them is that, galleries are great and physical and needed, but there's a lot of more artists out there that need to be captured on a platform that's digital and can be viewed instantly globally. And Latitudes is aiming to be the continent's largest online gallery that represents, right now they're probably selling in about 60 countries. It's a South African business with two co-founders, Lucia and Roberta. And the other part is just to also kind of follow some publications that are covering what's happening here, read about the industry, come to museums, see who they're representing. And then the galleries here also in South Africa in particular. I'm not too sure about the rest of the continent outside of Latitudes capturing that. I can't speak through that too much, but there are obviously galleries in those regions as well.
So I would say, certainly the galleries provide a great platform. If not to buy, just to sort of study the landscape. There's no shortcut to buying art. I think you need to do your research, certainly, and work. You have to like what you buy. Certainly, in my experience, if you can avoid the trend, it's, the fashionable thing to do. But certainly galleries, I didn't even know about Latitude. So thank you for that. I'll check that out. But I'm sure it's a great tool that can be used if you want to start buying art.
Hi, I think it's a privilege to be with you guys tonight. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask if you guys have seen a short documentary film called Shut Up and Paint by Titus Kaffer.
No, I know the artist, but I haven't seen the documentary.
Yeah, it's shortlisted for possible Oscar.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So basically, Titus Kaffer has made work where he's looking at the complexities of racial politics in America with regards to whiteness and blackness and stuff like that. And in the documentary, he's questioning the challenges he faces as a black artist with regards to the idea that he's constantly making great work, but black people, where he comes from, are not consuming it. And he, in the documentary, is venting out his frustrations and stuff like that. And there's a very important part in that film where he talks to a collector. And the collector says, Titus, I'm not buying your work because of the political narrative. I'm buying it because it's beautiful. And in that film, it becomes an echo. And he has a poet, a friend of his, who he resonates with and keeps on going on with that concept. And at the end of the film, he decides that the painting that he made, he's going to make it into a film so that people where he comes from are able to consume the film because they don't have access to the paintings. And that his family doesn't even come to his exhibitions. So those were some of the frustrations he was going through. So I wanted to ask you guys as black collectors, how do you feel with regards to artists who make social political narratives that are very deep, very concerning, very relevant in this current time and moment, but then there's this angle where some institutions reject that work, and some institutions, because of patronage, whatever, but some collectors buy the work because it's beautiful and it's nice in their homes, in their collections.
So this is a great question, and I was very privileged to see Titus speak at Duke University about 4 years ago. And incredible brain, incredible thinker. Collection is very much a preference. It's like what people, and collection also changes at a time. When NSARS happened in Lagos, because I spent so much time there in the region with entrepreneurs that were affected by what was going on there, it struck so deeply with me. And to your point, I felt that moment needed to be captured in a way that we never forget because of how relevant it was. So very few people know of an artist called Lemmy, and I'm going to get Lemmy's surname wrong. He used to paint Fela's covers, right? So all the great covers we see of Fela, of what was happening when Fela would go on tour, his vinyl covers were painted by a Nigerian artist who's still alive today. Simultaneously, when NSARS happened, I was living in the US, in North Carolina, and Black Lives Movement was extremely hot at that time. And it was just interesting seeing that happen simultaneously. So being a lover of Fela and what he was about, and I had a relationship with Lemmy. So I call Uncle Lemmy, I'm like, oh God, Lemmy, I think it's so important that a person of your relevance, of your history, capture, and I should say that video because he made a video of this, capture what is happening today. Because you've lived this, you've seen it, and it's happening again. Please make works around this. And he took the time, he took, I want to say 6 to 8 months, he didn't rush it, but it was, as a collector, I felt that in that moment I needed to step out of the zone I was in of collecting Black lavishness, Black luxury, to say, yo, we cannot miss what's happening here. It needs to be captured by the right people. Let's do this. And I think that's where collectors, institutions, all of them have this, call it, like it's a relationship that changes. It's not constant from what I found. But it is also important to recognize when these things are happening, then they get captured. So as a collector, I would say where I am today could be very different. I appreciate great work. I think, less than 1% of museums have arts by Black people right now. And we have to fix that. We have to fix that. And there's going to be a journey on how we get there, what sort of works get there. But, what you are asking, I think, is a great question. But it's also important to understand why collectors collect, what drives them, what is their preference, and to also understand that that can change at a time.
Yeah. So look, I think for the continent and for diaspora, for us to see works that represent who we are and not just what we see here, but some of the struggle, that story must be told by us. And the reason why this is an African museum, MOCAA, and that's why I think that's a fundamental reason why you've seen this collection. There's no point, and of course, there's some sympathy, of course, if you don't live on the continent. So if you live in Europe, it's probably going to take a while. But certainly without your story being written by yourself, you can expect to see yourself in that story. And that's the struggle. So, yes, there's some concessions, and museums are saying, well, let's sort of, on an equal opportunity sort of thing, place 1 or 2 Black artists in the museum. But that doesn't address the issue. The issue is we need more African museums on the continent. There is no reason why this continent cannot have several of these museums, MOCAA, throughout the continent. And if people from around the world, even if African works are not shown in Europe or America, if people want to see great African works, they come to Africa. Nothing wrong with that. And so I'm not despondent about works not being shown, okay, let me put it this way. I'm not despondent about the fact that we're not where we should be. I'm quite hopeful, considering where we're coming from.
If I can add something to your question, which is really a great question. I mean, Titus is one of the most celebrated African American artists today, right? In ways that, of course, his work is very engaged, is very political, and it's one of the multiple spans and avenues of Black experience, right? And interestingly, we were looking at his work while we were in the process of, putting together the show. And we even initially we even selected a series of him until we had to, not confirm it. But what I want to say about the core of your question is, or his question that you conveyed to us is why certain artists are considered in certain collection and certain artists are not. And I think Pule gave a good answer to it at the beginning of his reply, is that the very kind of raison d'être or constitution, let me say, of a collection is a specific orientation. So if you give your collection a specific orientation, let's say Black portraiture, or works that don't deal with, struggle, or works that only deal with joy and revelry. So an artist like Atose Aguele would not fit into that one. That doesn't mean that you don't appreciate the work. That doesn't mean that the work has no value. It just means that it doesn't fit into the criteria that you set up for your collection. It can be individual collection, it can be public collections, it can be, institutional collections. So, and that is why we need as many collections as possible, because the more different and varied collections we have, the more stories we can tell, the more conversations we can have, the more even confrontations we can have from one collection to another. So, but I think that, and kind of something that I'm hearing in the background that is kind of humming in my head, is what you said in the intro of your intervention, is that how do Black people, and I'm not saying African people, I say on purpose Black people, because it's really about that, be it from the continent, from the diaspora, from wherever Africanity has moved itself or Blackness has established itself. How do we in sort of reclaim that space of enjoying art in ways that, even commodified way, fair enough, right? But in ways that brings us back to the space of where art is at the center of our lives, which has always been on the continent and from an African perspective, right? So I think that this is really what we should really look at and, be concerned with. And that's why collecting practice from whatever perspective is essential to the ecology. There are a few, there's a mic here.
Good evening. My question actually leads from the previous one, and the words that stuck out for me was access and who consumes. Mm-hmm. And I'm quite interested, given that this collection is by a Black African artist. What responsibility does a collector have ensuring that the communities which these artists come from can consume this art? Particularly because, Zeitz is in the waterfront. Zeitz MOCAA is in the waterfront. That's not a totally accessible space. So I'm so interested in the concept of access on Black Africans consuming art and the ordinary person, the working class person consuming arts. And I'm interested to see whether that falls within your mandate as a collector.
The same question, can I add to it so it can be
Yes, please.
Exactly the same, precisely, if I may.
Thank you so much. Add to that the piece around access and how we can make it possible for more people, but also the role that museums and spaces like this have in inculcating the idea that art does something for communities. The conversation here has been so liberating. It's challenged, all manner of socio-political, economic. And I think people who don't have that access perhaps are left out of the conversation. So access can garner more for people who are really marginalized, and it's a place of liberation that more people need to access.
So, I'll try and remember everything.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, Pule. I want to say something, and I think that it would lead to an interesting conversation, is that this is a question that is always placed on art. That question is never placed on finance, tech, sports, what have you, cooking. It's always placed on art, as if art has this responsibility. Because, we'll have to do another conversation to unpack that. I answer like this with a lot of passion because I think that there is so much expectation imposed on art that art cannot fulfill, which is not its role. And I also believe that that's one thing. Tanda will have to develop another conversation. So that's one thing. The other thing is that there are only this many people in any given society that really have an interest in art, regardless of how much exposure you provide them. You cannot expect everybody to be interested in art. So those communities that we constantly are reminded of that they should get art, you will go there, the young girls and young people might be interested in something else, and fair enough. So what I want to say is that, of course, we have a responsibility as an institution, but for the collectors, the answer will be very complicated because these are private collections, right? So we are a public institution where people can come and enjoy art in our space. But what I want to say is that we have a responsibility of, providing, mediating art to the vast majority of people, as many people as possible. But there is a limit to that possibility. There is a limit to that access, because you can only inspire, encourage something who has a minimum of interest, and I think that the idea that art has to serve everybody is wrong. I think that it's wrong. I think that the expectation and the role that the general public give to art is beyond what art can deliver. I believe that very strongly. I, however, believe that the earlier one is exposed to, aesthetics, one is exposed to ideas of beauty, one is exposed to, forms of expression, one is exposed to freedom of expression, one is exposed to, multiple ways of extending life, which basically art does. The more likely, of course, as you grow up and as as you become an adult, that you might be, interested in that. And some people are even get all of that and still not interested. You can't force people. You cannot. That's what I just wanted to give ahead, yeah.
So I may have touched on this earlier. I do often think, and my siblings and I often think about bringing art to where people are. And as I mentioned earlier, I think those spaces in particular we focus on our work and education institutions and museums. So work is probably where about 50 to 60% of our collection sits. It's in younger generations, predominantly tech businesses, offices, where I'd say youth aged between 25 and 35 spend most of their time, are there from 8 to 5, get to see the art, interact with the art, and are inspired by it. The education side one is a bit tricky because, to Koyo's point, I think we need to start earlier of exposing kids to art, and being inspired by it at an early age is something we haven't quite cracked as yet. But the responsibility is with all of us. It's us as brothers and sisters, it's with the siblings, it's as parents that expose your kids to art. And it's not something that should just die when they become teenagers, it's something that should flourish. I'm a big tech investor and I follow a lot of what's happening in the tech industry. And people often ask me about what's artificial intelligence gonna do? Is it gonna wipe us out? Is it gonna clean up? And I can hand on heart say, creativity is the most important aspects you can instill in your kids today. It's priceless. Like, AI will do many wonderful things. If you're in radiology, I'd question that industry. If you're a lawyer, I'd question that industry. Creativity is what's gonna help kids flourish into the future. So that means as a parent, as a younger brother, as an older brother, older sister, make sure people are aware of creativity and enhance that as much as possible. So responsibility is all of us.
Yeah. Look, so we're talking about fine art, right? So we talk about, but art exists in several different sort of platforms, right? So if you go to the townships, people are exposed to art. I mean, you know, Africans are exposed to art every day. It may not be art in a frame, but you look at fashion, you look at music, that's art. So I'm not as concerned about the exposure to, for example, a MOCAA. Of course, it should be encouraged, but that will happen organically. People in our communities and poorer communities have a lot of other issues. Art is probably not a priority. Again, Koyo has said it cannot be the responsibility on the industry completely. I think we have some role and some responsibility, but certainly not entirely. Especially if you look at curriculums around the continent where they are in fact scrapping art as a subject, that's a problem. And so, you know, the community needs to understand that there is going to be some price to pay if, for example, you're scrapping history, you're scrapping art. If young people don't know anything about their history, they probably won't know anything about the Sokoto, for example, and the role he played. And so I think it's multifaceted, and I think it's a complex topic. And I think as a collector myself, or custodian, I like to use the word custodian. Certainly this is being held in trust for everybody. What we've done to essentially gift the works for the next 5 years, in some small way, does give access. Ordinarily, some of these works would be seen by family and friends, but hopefully for the next 5 years, they will be seen by thousands and thousands of people. So that's the kind of access we're trying to do in our own little way.
Thank you so much. If there are, oh yes. There are two people. We take two questions. The gentleman here first. He was first, I think, and then the lady in the back.
Thank you so much. This is such a great moment. I think the first thing I want to say is it's really great to actually be able to see Black collectors. I think you spoke so much about the importance of Black artists and us being able to see their art, but I think as a young person in just the art world, seeing Black collectors, being able to hear you contextualize why you do what you do is really important. But my question has to do with, I guess, the show itself, and the show is great. I mean, I've only seen it once, but it's really great. And I think it creates this initial moment of interest and curiosity to Black art and the different ways in which it is expressed and shown, or like what other forms of it exist, what other movements can come of it, specifically from the African context, so to speak. Is that something the museum is thinking about in terms of how is that facilitated moving forward? I mean, it's great that the show is traveling, but I mean, how is this facilitated moving forward? Even to the collectors, because beyond the artists, there are other people who make part of this industry or this world. Are you thinking about engaging with like Black curators or Black gallery owners? Yeah, that is essentially my question.
Well, I think the kind of mission statement that the museum gave itself is about, I can never say it by heart. I always have to get it somehow. It's Zeitz MOCAA is dedicated to showing, preserving, and collecting art from Africa and its diaspora. I think we are the only museum in the whole world that has that mission statement. And Africa and its diaspora is very important. You have, like the Studio Museum, which is African American. You have the Afro-Brazilian, which is the Afro-Brazilian Art Museum. You have the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco and in New York and in Atlanta and in other places. But you don't have any museum anywhere in the world that is dedicated to the practice of African and Afro-diasporic artists. So that is the significance, and that is the curatorial and institutional focus of Zeitz MOCAA. So talking about Blackness and talking about Africanity, particularly on the continent, there are limits to Blackness, in the sense that Blackness originates certainly from the continent, but the continent is not only Black. So if we want to embrace the full scopes and the full breadth of Africa, we certainly have to go beyond Blackness. And we have to question the complexities and the contentions of Blackness itself from within the continent, as much as how it plays out in the diaspora. So, and this is what we are trying to, how do you say it, do institutionally. And I am a die-hard Pan-Africanist, in the sense that, from Tunis to Cape Town, from Dakar to Djibouti, all of that is my land. And I am conscious about the social, particularities and singularity and regionalities, and even racial contradictions, if you want, by by lack of a better word. But what I want to say with it is that I fundamentally believe that we are getting to a point where we certainly have to address the fact that the continent is not only Black. And we are trying to do that institutionally in ways that, respond to the urgency of rethinking race on the continent, if you want. Thank you. There is a question there.
I'll make this quick. I'm not sure if this is working. I just wondered if you allow people to come to your offices to see the art, or on a very special occasion, your home. I have to confess, I have an ulterior motive. I'm an art guide in Cape Town.
So some of the spaces here in Cape Town where it's the entrepreneurs' companies on first Thursdays will open up.
Fantastic. Thank you.
And that's, okay, thank you there was another question? Okay. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Atose. Thank you, Pule. Thank you, Tanda. Thank you. Thank you to our wonderful team at Zeitz MOCAA. Thank you for coming, and continue to follow our programs and information. And I hope to see you again to the next public talk. In the meantime, enjoy our amazing exhibitions. Pardon?
And buy membership.
And our Director of Institutional Advancement, yeah. And of course, if you are not yet a member of Zeitz MOCAA, consider becoming one.